Shall we? I'll invite you up. Actually. So thank you so much for coming today. It is late in the term. It is snowy outside. So every single person, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate you taking the time and helping us support some really impactful and important research that's going on here in Edmonton by researchers connected to the university. So welcome. Before we go any further, what I'd like to do is a land acknowledgement. And this is from Kihuastan, which is the Indigenous center that shares the space of MacEwan. So we acknowledge that the land on which we gather is Treaty 6 territory, which is the traditional gathering place for many Indigenous people. We honor and respect the history, languages, ceremonies, and cultures of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who call this territory home. The First Peoples' connection to the land teaches us about our inherent responsibility to protect and respect Mother Earth. With this acknowledgement, we honor the ancestors and children who have been buried here, missing murdered Indigenous women and men, and the process of ongoing collective healing for all human beings. We are reminded that we are all treaty people and have the responsibility that we have to one another. And in my understanding as a settler and acknowledging my responsibilities as a treaty person, that these land acknowledgements are not just rote, that we also can and will connect this kind of work with our everyday lives. And I was just thinking about the ways in which, as I drove here I live just outside the city, and the way that I drove in today, I was really grateful and thankful for the way that the landscape has changed and what I was able to acknowledge through all this beautiful snow that we had today. And that I was able to arrive safe, which is also a bonus to what we're doing. And so I want to welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. And what I would like to do is to welcome up the director of the Research Institute for Urban Wellness to tell you a little bit about this institute, Dr. Marielle Papin.
Thank you. I'm going to make it super short because I haven't prepared a speech. And I also don't like long speeches about institutions, even though I am a political scientist. But let's forget about that for a second. The Research Institute for Urban Wellness is a new initiative started earlier this year at MacEwan. It's a group of researchers. We also have a variety of partners, and all of those people are interested in one way or another in this very broad topic of urban wellness. So they are interested in understanding different issues related to the urban environment, and that all together help us understand how to improve the well-being of people who live in cities and municipalities. And so we are very excited to have here Dr. Millar, to have here Lam to tell us about their research, how it relates, in one way or another to this broad topic of urban wellness. Super excited to host you here. This is actually our first speaker series event. So it's a great moment for us for sure. And I will stop here.
Thank you. And so let us introduce today the two folks we have here. Thank you again coming here in the snow to be here for us today. And so Stefan Millar is a social anthropologist at Helsinki University with a specialization in state migration and what's described as life course. We're going to learn more about that. He's also a postdoctoral fellow here at MacEwan University in the Department of Anthropology, Economics, and Political Science, and is affiliated with MacEwan's Research Institute for Urban Wellness. Stefan completed his PhD at the Max Planck Institute for Social Anthropology in Germany, where he examined the role of the state in the context of the Kakuma Refugee Camp in Kenya, which is where he met Lam. Majok Lam Thone is from South Sudan, and he arrived in Alberta in July of 2022. He volunteers and works as an interpreter with the Catholic Social Services to aid in welcoming and the settlement of incoming refugees and immigrants. He is now a student and an undergraduate research assistant at MacEwan University. Together, Stefan and Lam are now exploring East African migrants' use of elderhood and experiences of the state here in Edmonton and elsewhere. They're here today to talk about the topic of mimicry in the migration regime And I hope that you'll all help me welcome them to their presentation, which will last about 30 minutes or 35 minutes. And we'll have time for questions from the audience. Thank you.
On behalf of Lam and me, we're really happy to be here at the Institute for Urban Wellness, and special thanks to Marielle for hosting us and having us here, and Jen for organizing and basically making coming to Canada so smooth and easy. It couldn't have happened without you and your assistance, so big thank you there. So this paper has been kind of something me and Lam have been working on for a long time now, thinking about the process of resettlement and its consequences. So like Jen mentioned, Lam and I met back in Kakuma Refugee Camp in 2018 when I did my PhD fieldwork. He was my Juba Arabic teacher, and then quickly realized he became my very key and important research assistant and helped me move around, get around the camp, meeting people and getting to know what life was like there. Before we begin, I'm just going to ask Jen one quick favor. Changing the slides for me? No, because you cannot. I got to juggle 3 things in my hand, and I don't know if you've done that before, but juggling is not fun. So in this paper, Lam and I explore the process of resettlement and how it subjugates refugees through it. Based on Lam's own personal experiences of being resettled from Kakuma to Edmonton, and my own ongoing fieldwork from Kakuma in my PhD until now here in Edmonton, we explore how the process of resettlement cultivates a neo-colonial relationship between refugees and the humanitarian agencies that govern them across these 2 sites of Kakuma and Edmonton. In Kakuma, refugees seeking resettlement undergo an extensive interview process, during which they're meant to demonstrate their vulnerability, recite traumatic incidents, and retell these events to be eligible for resettlement. Oftentimes, without previous knowledge of the resettlement process, or if they're suffering from extreme trauma, those who do not know the process will often fail it. However, those who can practice it, learn about it, and understand its very processes are more likely to succeed. We argue resettlement creates this neo-colonial process or relationship between refugees and the agents that implement it, the UNHCR. To assess or access UN-sanctioned mobility to places in the global north, refugees inadvertently subvert or perform subservience to humanitarian agencies by mimicking their normative understandings of what it means to be vulnerable. Even after being resettled to a third country such as Canada, resettled persons continue to face forms of subjugation through programs of cultural assimilation and linguistic assessment. Facilitated by local agencies such as the Catholic Social Services, such programs can determine access to education, work, and ultimately social mobility here in Canada. One issue me and Lam have been coming across repeatedly is this Canadian language benchmark test, an exam used to assess newly arrived refugees' use of English language. Such a test penalizes accents and vocabulary outside of the so-called hegemonic English use in the global north. For refugees seeking higher education, their social workers will use such benchmarking to not determine what education they access, but suggest. However, for many refugees, they don't have the agency at the time, especially at first arriving, to question that knowledge or that interpretation, nor do they have the full scale or sweep of what those implications mean from the benchmark test. So for those, however, while some are determined by this and ultimately do not want to return to higher education or told to go to high school, they do not want to extend those years of doing more studying into English that they already possibly speak, and prefer to go into the workforce, which is often these extractivist forms of cheap labor here in Alberta. For those able to learn or to mimic standardized English and cultural norms of Canada, access to higher education and social mobility becomes increasingly possible. In turn, such actors, this is the great thing about how, oh dear. Maybe I should have thought about this beforehand. Sorry. Such actors have to navigate such neo-colonial relations, cultivating resistance and negotiating spaces of cultural autonomy. So in this presentation, I will initially give some background to the process of resettlement from Kakuma to Canada, then outline our theoretical understanding of mimicry, before passing on to Lam, who will detail his personal experiences from one humanitarian urban setting, such as Kakuma, to another in Edmonton. So where Lam and I met was Kakuma Refugee Camp. Established in 1992, it's over 30 years old now, a very rudimentary space of protection and aid for refugees. While the UNHCR oversees refugee resettlement procedures and decisions, it is assisted by a whole host of other agencies such as IOM and the Kenyan state. In 2016, the Kenyan state took over refugee management in response to Al-Shabaab attacks in Kenya. Despite this, the Kenyan state takeover has been often framed as a form of decolonization or localization of refugee management in Kenya. Ultimately, however, it often forms as a form of giving the Kenyan government more control over the resettlement process. Despite this, the UNHCR still is the primary manager of it and is seen as those you compete with or ask for to enable to get resettlement. So resettlement is a process where one refugee is transferred from one asylum country to another. The likelihood of receiving resettlement, however, as we all know, is extremely rare. In 2023, approximately 1,300 people were resettled from Kenya altogether, out of a total population of 700,000. In Canada, in 2023, approximately 500,000 persons were given permanent residence or permanent immigrant status, and 30% of which came from resettlement. Canada is often valorized from outside as one of those places of policies of integration and multiculturalism. However, as you all know, this is slowly kind of coming to an end as policies similar to other global north states are starting to become imposed. So this valorization, as I have seen it as coming here, has masked the reality of lived experiences of refugees here in Edmonton. Often, Canada is seen as this place of multiculturalism, integration. However, through Lam's experiences, it's very much something quite different. My mic is very dry. So mimicry, and why we use it. Mimicry is a means to copy or imitate. For anthropologists and later post-colonial theorists, mimicry was used to describe how the colonized often came to imitate the colonizer. So Bhabha conceptualizes mimicry as this kind of ambivalent strategy whereby the colonized people express their subservience to the more powerful. At one level, the colonial class aimed to explicitly civilize their subjects and mold them into the image of the colonized. These so-called civilized natives would become intermediaries between the colonized and the colonizer. However, their uncanniness came to destabilize these colonial relations. Those that could mimic the colonial class and perform the cultural practices and speak the language, but would not have the same rights or standard of living associated with the colonial class. As a result, those so-called civilized natives would not only exclude from the colonial class, but would be isolated from their own indigenous communities. As Bhabha argues, the colonial relations generated from mimicry posed a threat to the colonial system, as the practice of mimicry could expose the myths of superiority that maintained colonialism. In other words, mimicry exposes the forms of symbolic power that relied upon by the colonial authorities. Those that understand and can perform colonial cultural practices and knowledges have the capacity to inadvertently demystify or defetishize its power over them and ultimately cultivate resistance. As Bernard Mugambe notes, such imitations, however, were not adaptations to the colonial regime, but a survival mechanism to the trauma of colonialism. Reflecting Fanon's mentality of the colonized who internalized self-hatred was manifest in a perverse attraction for the colonial master. As Fanon reminds us, mimicry can produce a sense of alienation through idealizing the culture of the colonizer and in doing so, inadvertently dehumanizing themselves. However, in the post-colonial period, it's become difficult to identify such practices of mimicry. Ferguson notes how the simple colonial binaries that mimicry depend on are harder to obviously locate today in an age of global flows and transnational organizational forms. Despite this, Ferguson argued that they still exist but in different forms. For Ferguson, mimicry is an expression of modernity in an increasing unequal world. So we build upon Ferguson's argument. We explore how the unequal distribution and access to mobility is creating new configurations of mimicry in the post-colonial. For those in situations of containment, for example, in refugee camps such as Kakuma, the capacity to mimic the behavior and normative practices of the governing agencies have a unique advantage to accessing resettlement. So I turn now to our two field sites, where Lam and I have been doing ongoing research. So this neo-colonial relationship, we argue, between refugees is experiencing this unequal access to mobility and the urban environments it generates from that lack of mobility. For example, refugees in Kenya do not have the right to freedom of movement. Instead, are actively encouraged or at times forced to reside in UN-sanctioned refugee camps. In camps like Kakuma, refugees' movement is strictly controlled by police checkpoints and enforced by the UN's nighttime curfew. Lam will note that moving after 6 p.m. is very dangerous, so if you want to go to a bar or have fun, you better watch out for the police bat. As a result, refugees are forced to depend on humanitarian agencies for limited water, food rations, and medical supplies. In contrast, the UNHCR staff that operate the camp live in a luxurious space, a double-walled fortified compound manned by private security and Kenyan police. For UN staff, the compound is spacious, air-conditioned accommodation, social amenities such as a bar, a restaurant, a running track, and an empty pool full of snakes. One UN officer moaned to me that, oh, the pool never got filled with water, unironically in a very arid region of Kenya. Despite this, UN staff also move around in air-conditioned jeeps and are brought by airplane from Kakuma to Nairobi at any time they wish, about, I think, 3 times a week. Such humanitarian urbanism and unequal access to mobility, we argue, cultivates this neo-colonial relationship between refugees who do not have freedom of movement and humanitarian staff who have an excess. So in Edmonton, the contrast between those who arrive for resettlement and those who administer it is not so apparent, owing to obviously the lesser extent the humanitarian infrastructure takes here. Rather, the neo-colonial relationship, as we see it, is defined by the lack of social mobility and urban wellness. For those who arrive here via resettlement, their position within the city is tied to pre-existing class divides, as those who come as refugees are far more likely to work in precarious extractivist industries or as low-wage laborers. In turn, migrants are forced to live in parts of the city impacted by other social demands, such as drug addiction or police violence. This can culminate in a sense of disillusionment and alienation within the city. So I'm very glad to pass this on now to Lam, who will finally do some much more interesting things than me and tell you more about his experience of being resettled to Edmonton, and but first talking about life in Kakuma. You want to come here?
Okay, thank you so much. Okay. Thank you so much for all of you coming out today to come and listen as I speak. And I guess, again, sorry, English is not the first language that I went to school. It is Arabic. So because I come from the part of the world where people taught Arabic, so that's the first language. And I have the second language when English comes. Second language is Swahili, which is one of the languages spoken in East Africa. Maybe you watch a little bit of Lion King, Hakuna Matata. So that's where I came from. In that case, I'm very happy today to talk to you together with my friend, Dr. Millar, and also we are very happy for Dr. Long for welcoming us. Thank you so much. I will take you through what my experience is in a refugee camp in East Africa and up to where I am today in Canada. Thank you so much. Okay, as Dr. Long said before, and Dr. Stephen Millar said, my name is Lam. I'm from Southern Sudan. So what I want to talk to you today is my life experience from refugee in a rural area to still being a refugee in the urban area. So conflict and displacement have been a consistent experience in my life. I was born during Second Sudanese Civil War. I went to school to Catholic Missionary School. And later on, I was fortunate to enroll in a bachelor degree political science in Sudan. After one semester, the priest that sponsored my school, my studies, was killed and he passed away, unfortunately. Through my other life, I have moved from different camps between year 2004 up to 2022. I have been made a refugee 3 times, I remember very well. I live in Kakuma Refugee Camp, the largest camp in Africa, and I think maybe second largest in the world, from the year 2017 to 2018. During that time, I was forced to live in a reception center due to my lack of mobility, so I can't be able to go anywhere. In the reception center, we were often fed from the kitchen basic meals of made to sleep in a crowded room where theft was common. Whenever international donors came to visit, the staff would cook for us meat and vegetables, clean the place, and tell us to say good thing about the refugee life. It is difficult to say good thing about Kakuma for now, as it comes with a lot of memories of hardship and a lot of trauma. Kakuma is situated in the semi-arid area of Turkana in northwestern Kenya, East Africa. For 3 decades, many displaced people from East African countries have called the camp home. Upon arrival in Kakuma, refugees receive basic ration of foods and water. However, every year, food ration have been reduced. For example, now a single individual can receive 2 kgs of basic food for 1 month. On top of this, basic service like health care, school are no longer free. Many refugees find it hard to support themselves as they are only allowed to work for maximum of $25 in a humanitarian agency. As I vividly remember thinking to myself one night, how can I end this physical and psychological torture? I began to ask many of my fellow refugees, how can I leave the camp? Through resettlement, which is a process from one country to another third country. Many told me that resettlement is not an easy thing, but that I should use my reduced mobility as a chance to make a claim for it. To get resettlement, you must prepare and know how the system works. Make your case hard. First, you must book appointment with a lawyer in a UNHCR or a UN offices in the camp. However, this is not an easy task. To get an appointment, you need to get the field force office, or you need to get the field force office in the morning, like 4 a.m. Maybe you are footing, because the camp is very big, it's a vast city of refugees. For example, I can remember that time because I used to work with crashes. I have to walk 2 hours and something at night, the whole night to go to the office. So yeah, and to get appointment, you need to get to the field for 4 a.m. in the morning or early sometime. Wait in a long queue until the office open at 9 a.m. in the morning. You will be there without being given any food or water. And you hope that to be called before the hot sun hits you, because the sun is sometimes 45, 46 degrees Celsius in that part of the world. So if you are successful, your application will be lined behind thousands of applicants, which is a humiliating and a difficult process. So you cannot complain. Yeah. Okay. So you cannot complain and always be grateful, because sometime, somewhere, maybe someone also can delete your application. After months or even maybe years of waiting, you may be called for the interview by the UN staff. They will inform you through text message, telling you the date, time you must attend an interview. Again, you must attend, dress well, and not complain about being in the queue or dust or heat sun. In the interview, they ask you many questions over a long period of time. Later, they interview you second time or many times. You must keep the story the same exactly, or they will deny you resettlement if you have small changes of the statement. Now to my life story exactly in the camp. I was interviewed. I had to tell the staff or the UN people who are working there about being a student in Sudan when the civil war broke out, and my long journey to Kenya. For me, telling the interview was like reciting thousands of years struggle that began with my grandfather, my father, and myself. Reciting such intergenerational trauma was difficult. For many people, telling severe trauma is impossible. For example, in many East African communities, they consider it is taboo to discuss your life story struggles. But the UN ignore this and force many people to tell their story to strangers. Those who have severe trauma cannot do this and often are forced to live the rest of their life in the camp. I was fortunate to receive resettlement after a long time, many years. It comes with many downsides after living in the camp for almost a decade. The UNHCR informed successful candidates by displaying their name on a billboard, so everyone knows who got the resettlement. And for majority of refugees, it feels like a mockery because they live in the camp for 3 decades or more without getting their lottery. When you become like an outcast in your community when you get help or you get a settlement. You are constantly feeling anxious and stressed, and the process is very slow, and also worried that it can be cancelled anytime for minor reason, like maybe for testing in the camp where refugees have no food or water and you join them. So other refugees can also be jealous because they can accuse you of crime or curse you with witchcraft because they see you are only lucky human being among thousands of people to get the chance. During the coronavirus, this is the time I supposed to come to Canada, but I almost lost the process by that time because I was waiting for the flight. Then, many times when I go to the office to go and do a medical checkup, they have to tell me that I'm positive with COVID-19, and I can't see any symptom or any sign of being sick. Later on, one friend of mine told me that the doctors in the office are playing game. COVID-19 now is a lucrative business for refugee, for UN staff, which are doctors or the national staff, getting money from refugee and also to UN so that they report to the host or to the nation which donated the money to refugee that a lot of refugees have COVID-19. Then the Kenyan Department of Health disqualified many people, like they disqualified me 3 times. Every time when I went, they denied me. Later on, when this friend told me that they are playing game with you, you have to do something. I had to face something, bribe. I know in Canada, it's a word that no one needs to listen. This word is not a good word. So I have to pay bribe. Me and my friend came together. We sell our food ration. The bribe that they also need is like, I don't know how can I say. It's not something big here, but there is something big. So I have to pay bribe to the managers, people who are controlling the camp, and people who are having responsibility for refugee to be declared to fly. Then they declare my test because they manipulate the result. They declare my test as negative. Then later on, after we sell everything with my friend, we pay those bribes. Okay, now up on my arrival in Canada, I was greeted by staff from Catholic Social Service in Edmonton International Airport. I live in a Catholic Social Service designated place for the refugee that they receive. They say this hotel, but I really don't know. Yeah, so for 1 week, and then later on, I was relocated to Catholic Social Service Reception Center. It was a job of Catholic Social Service in Edmonton or in Canada, maybe local organization to welcome and then show you where you will. Give me psychological assessment because when I arrived here, I was a different human being psychologically, and help me set up bank account, get me a health card. Then later on, the process of being a refugee from the step 1 to step 2 to step 3, again, is done. So I have to be registered, which is something that reminds me to become a refugee for the first time when crossing a border from Southern Sudan to Kenya. I was asked the same question again, many questions, all the stories, so that they have to put in the data. Then when I was moved to Catholic Social Service Reception Center, it is all the same story that remind me from when I first left my country. It is secure place, of course. They control who come and who go. I was living in reception center for 10 months because I need special care due to my lack of mobility. I need a home which suited my situation. Eventually, with the help of my social worker, we found a suitable home in Castledown. I had no choice, but I had to take it, as it was the only place available to me. The place had many amenities for people with limited mobility, but I have to pay a lot of my social security to live there. However, the problem with the area, it had a distance from Catholic Social Service Office and other amenities such as hospital and school. Sometimes I may miss the bus because the bus is very complicated here, causing me to be late for the appointment. Also, the area was very far away from first friend that I known from Africa for a long time and is living here. So it was very lonely living there. I started to feel anxious and depressed without having people or friends to talk to, because social contact is very important. I was being disturbed by my past trauma of being a refugee. I started to feel concern for those I left behind in Kakuma and also in my own country. By this time, my mother and my sibling were in Kakuma, and I want to support them. My basic needs were met, but I was informed if I send money or my social money that I get, the government may cut those money because if I want to help them. So this is like, when I think of it, I was like, it's kind of colonial mindset, because when you give me something, I give you something, it is up to you to use it. So you have no freedom to use it as your best you wish. After about a year living in Canada, I received a new social worker. I was able to explain to her my situation, because the first person, she was not able to understand really the way how I was feeling. So make her understand the problem I was feeling back home and the present problem that I was still facing in Canada. She seen me that I was very lonely. Then she helped connect me with Catholic Social Service so that I have the gift of languages, because I speak almost many languages, and she helped me get a volunteering job with Catholic Social Service, and then later on work with them for a few months. So, yeah. So I get to work as a translator or interpreter, welcoming new refugees who are coming to Canada or to Edmonton. With the money I received for this work, I was able to help my family back home. Eventually, the CSS liked my work that I did for them. They asked me to speak at a large fundraising event in Edmonton downtown, and I prefer a speech that emphasizes the work of the CSS. I can tell they like me to speak because my story, limited mobility, can motivate rich white people, sorry to say that, and to feel sad because of my long stories. And later on, the organization were lucky and they get donation because of the story that I told. Then through play into their idea of being vulnerable, refugee in need, I am mimicking this idea back to them, but I didn't mind because it came with a lot of benefits for me, such as salary and additional support for me to live. Eventually, with the help of my social worker, I was able to move to a new place in downtown, because the place that I was living first is very far. Then I arranged my own cleaner and someone that can help me, because I was not able to do everything for my own. I get someone from African community. However, at this point, I start to consider how I can get something big or larger salary or weight, so I can support my family. And also thinking of how I can also join a school and actually finish what I start from back home in Sudan, which is finish my degree in political science. So now, what I think when you first arrive in Canada is Catholic Social Service also give a refugee assessment of a language assessment, which is something that they said is conducted by Province of Bhabha. I did not realize at that time that test is only used to assess and advise what level of education you have. So I went and applied to do the test, thinking that if I pass the test, maybe I will get time to go and continue my study in university. So, because in the time when I left school, it was still 2013. However, for myself and many other new arrivals from English-speaking countries, especially in East Africa, we are often advised by social workers when we came here. And to start a new language test, so also the agency have to question, because also when you did that language test, you don't have authority to question them where they will place you after the test result. You think that they know the system very well and have your interests at heart. However, in the upgrade course, when I did my test, they gave me an upgrade course. While I already finished my high school long time ago and I was in university, so I have to attend Grand MacEwan. Then I came to MacEwan to attend the English classes or upgrade courses. And I met many other people also who have high school or even degree, diploma in East Africa or English-speaking country in Africa. But despite this, their English is not considered good enough to be accepted to post-secondary studies or university. I consider this test to be racist and push many talented Africans into low-wage work. When we consider how long it has taken us to be resettled to countries like Canada, the thought of returning to high school and wasting 2 years in studying English, many cannot endure this. Instead, many members of the African community prefer to work here, I think in Edmonton, or mostly in other part of Canada, instead of going to school, because you finish your degree and have to go back and have to do English test. In the meantime, I and Stephen are continuing to conduct research together on origin and consequences of this language test. While this research is not complete, I can confirm that it makes people illusion with the result of the test. You cannot endure going back to high school or upgrading. You have to feel it's like you're being forced into low wage or low paid job. I know many people rather work, instead of going to school, they rather work so that they support their family through this limiting experience. For myself, I continue to study. My aim is to do degree either in political science or social work. I can eventually support my family. Maybe help them come to Canada if I settle, and also give back to Canada because the way how they welcome me also played a big role in my life, and give back to my country. So now, in conclusion, the resettlement process forced many refugees to mimic the certain behaviors. To either receive resettlement, so that you have to mimic, which is kind of colonialism. And living in a refugee camp also is a struggle against controlling colonial system, a system where human is being reduced to the rule of UNHCR or UN or government agencies or government of that country. However, this is an unforgettable feeling for me. It is made of happiness and sadness when you leave the camp. You live the life in which you have to go somewhere and present yourself to the system, present yourself to someone who's like master, because you have to adapt to the new situation. In contrast, life in Edmonton and the support I received from Catholic Social Service were better, because when I was in Africa, I was in refugee camp. Many people think that Western world is a heaven, but in fact, it's not heaven. When I came in, I find, of course, there is a better situation, basic need for a human being, but it still is not heaven. So I do see a lot of delusion among my fellow refugees up to now, because I continue talking to them, thinking that I'm in heaven, that I can do a lot of them for them as someone who is in heaven, but it's not in heaven. So my feeling, like the idea of resettlement, was a little bit lie. And they are forced, when I see a lot of people who came from other parts of the world, who came as refugees, they have to do a low-wage job. While those who can play the system, maybe they can mimic the behavior of being a good refugee or a good guest and be able to get a high-wage job or a high-wage pay. So thank you so much, and this is what a little bit I can talk about today. So,
just to very quickly repeat as what Lam said. As Lam demonstrated, UNHCR resettlement creates a neo-colonial relationship between refugees and the UN. Lam has rightly documented resettlement forces refugees to mimic vulnerability, display that trauma to access mobility. This reinforces by very material conditions in the camp, where UN agents live in luxury and refugees live in despair. It follows the same logic as colonial Kenya, when whites lived in gated highland communities and indigenous Africans were placed into forced villages or reserves. Only those indigenous Africans who could mimic the whites, becoming their so-called civilized natives, could access mobility beyond the reserves. In Edmonton, similar facets are unfolding. Those from former British colonies, despite speaking English, are treated differently than those who come from former white dominions of the British Empire, such as Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa. Those newly arrived refugees from former British colonies are therefore indebted to the Canadian state and dependent on their social services as they're faced with a whole new system of regulations. Either they have the capacity to navigate the system and perform the good migrant narrative, allowing them to access social mobility in Canada, or for the vast majority, be forced as a source of cheap labour for the extractivist economy of Alberta. For many, extended periods of time repeating high school or English classes is outweighed by the pressure to support family in Canada or abroad. Prompts many resettled refugees in Canada to feel disillusioned with the prospects here. We wanted to show how the colonial relationships are still at play today, either between UN agents and refugees, or in performances of the good migrant narrative. These relational settings encourage mimicry. In the post-colonial period, coincide with new formations of power, such as the global migration regime, and also the proliferation of borders across resettlement contexts of Kenya and Canada. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much for. I wondered if there was any questions from the crowd that we could ask. If anyone has it, I can come to you with the microphone. So full service. Julia, come on. Thank you.
For the refugees coming from this specific camp, is the only way something like gaps and gets connected to Edmonton through public social services? Like if you were to be a practicing Catholic person, would that happen affect to legal as
If you're not Catholic, it would affect you if you don't go for the Catholic social services, like Muslims.
Yeah. No, I don't think it will affect anyone. But what I know is just in my memory is kind of connecting, contextualize like the way out the process of agencies from Africa to here. So I think they look the same. So no effect for one individual. So the same way for all the people.
Thank you. I'm coming up to Jill. I'm going to go in.
I think the thing that I can recommend is that, for example, the agencies which are given responsibility by the government to receive refugee, like Catholic Social Service, they have to know refugee who came here, they cannot just be assessed like English test or English language, because when they assess you and they get that result, this is the result that they send to the school. And they don't follow, they don't know when you go to those schools, where they go and put you into English classes again, which you're supposed not to do. So I think something that the government and the agencies can work on it, and they have to change.
I add to that? I think just to add what Lama said, I think the Canadian language benchmark test should be abolished. It's absolute colonial rubbish.
Thank you. Any other questions? We have time for about one more.
Sorry, the microphones are facing that way. Can you speak a bit louder? We can't hear you.
The language test was mentioned more than once. I was just wondering if you could expound on that and explain what kind of test might be better, or should there be more tests? I'm interested in that because I actually teach English, so I'm interested in more about both of you, what you think.
And so, if there, what other things could happen if there wasn't a language test? How much?
Okay, yeah, I know she's my teacher, and I'm very happy for her. For that, I think there is other people who are very good in math and physics. They don't need to be tested with English. If they don't know English and they know physics and they know chemistry, so they are good to go. So I don't think they have to be taken to English class. Sorry for that, but I did English.
Just as what Lam said, they have high school diplomas from countries that speak English. A lot of them. We have Kenyan students here, we have Ugandan students here that come from countries where English is taught in schools. But yet, for some reason, when they go for this test, they are benchmarked for a lower grade than they supposedly are. Somehow, I don't know, we don't know the ins and outs of the test, how it's fully assessed, but there is a discrepancy when you look at the statistics of those who come from particularly Africa being benchmarked for lower. So what I assume is that it is because a particular linguistic way of speaking or accent is somehow put as a lower grade than those who come from, say, Australia or North America or Europe.
And I think because thank you very much, our two presenters for today and for thank you again so much for coming out, and we look forward to seeing you at the next Research Institute for Urban Wellness event. Thanks, folks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Time to review it.